Alright, we're back with a new video today, and today we're going to be taking the HTML page from the RNBO Cycling 74 template and rewriting sections of it to match the user experience that we want to have for our exported RNBO patch. If we recall what it used to look like in Max, we had these multi-sliders that helped us describe when we would have values for our melodic and our rhythm sequence. When we had the sliders all the way down to 0, then there would be silence for those. And right now on the web version based off the template, we would have to type in values that matched, let's say that's 0.20, 0.5, that would match what we would do maybe in Max when we have 0.20 and 0.5. And on the website, that's not the ideal sort of experience that we want to have for users to type in those sorts of things. And we want to match this sort of maxi experience that we have here on the web. And so some portions we are going to have to use some HTML elements to create that interactive experience. We have some sliders here that allow us to change the things that we want, like volume, but we don't need to keep all of these. For example, another one that we can change is tempo, and most likely we won't want to use a slider to do that. We'll go back over here and have something like a tempo where we can type in something like 84 beats. But we want to have specific spots for these elements and not have a drop-down menu like we have over here. So we're going to be creating the basic structure. Right now everything is basically black and white, and then some user elements, interactive elements. Back when we're finished, we're going to have more of a user interface that's going to be more graphically oriented. I created a mock-up of what I thought would be interesting to shoot for, and this could be for the web version as well as the mobile phone version. So it's going to be very similar in terms of structure and layout. And so by the end of today's video, we should have something like this. We are not going to be working on any of the JavaScript today. That's the logic behind it, and that's going to be the next separate video. This video is going to be more of like a follow along with me and do as I do, and so you're going to have to code along with me. I think that might be an more interesting experience rather than just watching me do it and then copy and pasting. Some things to think about if you've never created an HTML page is that oftentimes the underlying structure is not necessarily straightforward. When I try to do this, I think about using building blocks and containers and trying to organize elements to it. Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's not, and I'll sort of talk you through what I'm looking at. We are going to be using things like divs that are going to be containers for objects. We are going to be using Flexbox, which is a way to coordinate the layout of elements. There's a couple mainstays in HTML layouts, and Flexbox is one of them. I have a link to a useful resource in the description of this video, so please check that out. Cool. So let's just talk through this portion of my mockup. And you'll see that I have some different types of typefaces, some different sizes. We're going to be able to nitpick those later today. And when I start to coordinate how do we translate the visual side of it into something that might be HTML, again, I'm thinking about containers and how we might organize things. This larger container will end up being some sort of main container. Main container, and then we might have a section that's going to be a container or a div. Ooh, I want that see-through. That's going to be for some of these headings, and so there's going to be one main container here that's going to have a heading for the RNBO, and then a smaller container that's going to have these two elements that are going to be the text. From there, we're going to have something that I call the transport area, and that's going to hold the tempo and the start interaction elements. And so for each of these, then they might have their own sort of little container. Let's see if I can do this. One here, like this, and another like this. And so just organizationally, I'm thinking about those things as I go along. We're going to start from there, and we're going to jump into Visual Studio Code and start to build from there. So one of the things that we should have in our project, because we download the template from GitHub, here it is, And I'll have a link to this in the description of this video too on YouTube, so you can navigate to here. In case you've lost either of them, the two main things that we're going to be looking at today are the HTML page and the CSS. And so if you navigate here, then you can go to the index.html, click on that, and you should be able to navigate to, if you expand this just a little bit, then there's a button that says copy raw file, and we can start from there. Okay, so we can do that for the HTML. We hit copy raw file, or if we come back to our VS Code, this is where I'm at right here. I'm gonna shrink myself so you don't have to see a lot of me. I want to pause this section right here just so I can interrupt and point out one thing that I might not have talked about for VS Code. And one set of libraries that I'm using in VS Code that I think is really, really handy is a way to format your text documents depending on what type of files that you're using. We're going to be doing HTML and CSS today, and if you're not used to using those types of documents, there are clean practices to help you be able to read the text that you are writing. And there's television shows that talk about how to format, use tabs or spaces to make it visually look nice. But there are libraries that help you do that, and it can be really handy and a huge time saver. And I forgot to mention that, I believe, in other previous videos, but I'm going to talk us through it right now. And on the left side of your VS Code is going to be a section called extensions, and you can click on this, and for me, I have some things that are available. There's a search bar, and this shows the libraries that you have installed based on the different types of development that you might be doing. But we want to be adding a particular library called Prettier, and this is basically a formatter that helps just make your text look cleaner depending on the libraries that you see. And so that if you have code brackets, different types of tabs or tags, it's going to make it visually more clean, and it might color code it the certain way that you want. I personally like this one that's called Prettier. You can click on it and it'll open up a new window. You might have to search for it depending on how many tabs you have open. You can see it right here for me. And if you don't have it installed, then you can click on the install button. One of these blue boxes is going to hit install. Once you have it installed, then you can close that one window, close down the extension. If you have Prettier that appears down here in this bottom right, then you're good. And for most of the time, when you hit save, it should automatically save for you. If that doesn't work, then you can hit Shift Command P and then choose the format document. There's a shortcut that's, I think, Shift Option F on a Mac, and it should do those changes for you. Yeah, Shift Option F. Another thing that you could do is every time that you save or hit the save button, you can have it set that it does formatting for you. So if you go to your palette again, if you go to File and then go to Settings, VS Code, Settings again right here, and if you type in, hit Save Format. I typed in Save Format for this search bar, and you can check this box that says Format on Save. And that can be really useful because then you don't need to go do two steps. This is just one step. Every time you hit save, it should clean up your formatting for you. That way, if you didn't automatically indent, it'll do the indentation for you, align things like divs and different types of elements according to the way that you have it set up. I hope you find this helpful. I'm going to disappear now. I'm going to drop back into the ongoing stuff that we had in the video. See ya. We can go to our file explorer and go to index.html. We didn't alter any of that the previous video, and you can save this or have it linger. I sometimes like to just make a copy and then do the edits from there, so I can right click on the index.html and then I'll just hit paste, or I can right click and hit paste here. I'm on a Mac, so I would normally hit Command V. pasted a new copy and called it index copy.html, and I can just hit return and rename it. So for the time being, I'm just going to call it new.html. The contents of it should look exactly the same as my index.html over here. I'm going to close index.html because I don't want to accidentally change anything from there. And now I want to go to VS Code, and remember how we installed this library that allowed us to have a local server version of those files that we had. We're going to go down here, and you can see there's this Go Live button, and if I hover over it, it says click to run live server. I'm going to click on that, and it should automatically launch my browser and open up. Since I had new.html as the open tab, then it opens up new HTML. If it didn't do that and it opened up just with the local IP address and the port, then please type in new.html. That way you know that you're looking at the contents of that page and not accidentally looking at the index.html. Great, I'm going to close some of these windows so I don't accidentally look at the wrong thing. And this is the current version of our HTML page. A lot of this doesn't really matter to us. We're not going to be hooking up a MIDI keyboard. We're not going to be sending information using this drop-down sort of way. And we're going to reduce the number of sliders that we have, and we're not going to use any presets for this set of videos. So if we go over here to new HTML, we are going to take away almost everything. And so I would highlight from the bottom up. I'm weird about highlighting. I go from the bottom up. I'm going to highlight from line 51, including line 51, all the way up to line 13. So stopping right before body. And I'm going to hit delete. I'm going to keep these other references right here. So this references some other templated JavaScript files. One is the app.js. We're going to make some alterations to that next video. That's the logic, the JavaScript logic, and the guardrails. So we're not going to touch any of those two things. Now, and if we hit save, then if we navigate back to our page, and then it basically should be empty or doesn't show anything because we don't have anything to show right now. And we're going to start working from there. Again, please follow along with me. And I think this will be an interesting experience if you've never written any HTML before. So I'm going to reduce this Explorer window because we're not going to deal with any other files at the moment. And then I'm going to just drag this over a little bit because I think it'll be interesting if we can see the contents that we start adding through our HTML page appear every time that we save. That's sort of the way that VS Code is set up. And we're going to start to add elements starting below the body. We can change this starting out. This says Rainbow Web Export. We can call this sequencer. From here, I'm going to start adding some things underneath body. And looking back at the sketch that we had over here, remember when I was describing things as containers, oftentimes the most basic container that we can use through code in HTML is something called a div. And a div basically allows you to segment places in your page and put even smaller containers within it. And so I have it set up in my VS Code, and hopefully you have it too, that if you start typing in div and then hit enter, then it'll automatically put in the closing tags. These are open and close angle brackets, and anything that is inside here is the contents of the div. So here I've created a div, and I'm going to give it an ID. There's two main ways to give identification to elements in HTML. One is a class and one is an ID. And oftentimes an ID, you can think about it as a unique sort of tag to an element. And a class is a way to group many different elements together. Think about showing up to an event and everyone has a unique ID. Everyone has their own name, and hopefully no one has the same name. But when you go to a class, think about maybe when we categorize animals and things like that, there are many animals that might fall into one certain class. So when I say that we're going to add an ID, we often type in lowercase ID equals and then double quotes with that ID name. So I'm going to name this first div main content, and then I'm going to give it a class of rounded. Eventually I might have a little container or border that wraps around everything. And my original version, I had these square, but I think the next version I would have is going to be rounded. And so I'm giving this div a specific ID, and no other elements are going to have this main content ID. From there, I'm going to create another div. And here's a shortcut for VS Code. If you type div and then you type in dot, then you can then immediately type out the class name if you want to. So this could be like a class name, and it will take that shorthand and automatically put it as a class name. I'm going to delete that and give you another example. I'm going to go div with a hashtag, and then this will automatically assign whatever you type after it as the ID of that element. Now that we understand the shorthand, we're actually going to delete this one more time. Bring in the preview and pull it down over here so we can keep a reference to what we are going to be making. So the preview is here, and this is the mock-up of what we're going to be working for. We're going to start adding some contents that we can start seeing. And keep in mind that we are just adding the elements and not the styling to it. And so we might see some text and UI elements appear, but they may not be the right color or shape or even size. But we're going to add those proper shape, size, and colors with the styling later. So we're going to start out by writing some shorthand. Remember how we wrote the div with the ID? There's another, we can use shorthand with different types of tags, and we're going to have the title tags that we have here, and I'm going to be using an H1 tag, which is a text type of tag that shorthand for heading 1, and I can add either a period, which would assign a class name if I wanted to, or if rather than having a period, I'm going to use a hashtag, it will add whatever I have after it as the ID name, similar to what we just had for the main content. And so inside main content, we're going to actually add a H1 tag with an ID of main-title. It automatically reformats it so that I can add in some text here. And here I'm going to type in a rainbow instrument. I'm going to hit save, and you can see that after we saved it, that text appears over here. Again, it's not in the proper spot yet. That is going to come with the styling that we're going to do later. Here I'm going to type in H2 hashtag subtitle, and then I'm going to write in sequencer like we have over here. Hit save. H2 and H1 have some defaults that resize sorts of things, and of course we're going to change those or customize them ourselves. So we created that first little container, this box right here, with those two elements. And so that's sort of what I was talking about before in terms of thinking about creating containers with for our elements. We're going to create a new container here, and then we're going to call this, we're going to have it be a div, and it's going to have a ID. So we're going to use hashtag transport, and then I'm also going to give it a class name of row. Writing all those out without having to write it out explicitly like this is a real time saver if you get used to doing that sort of workflow. Inside there, we're going to add a whole bunch of elements. You can see that I have some auto-complete stuff appearing, but I'm going to cancel that out so that we can talk through what appears. I'm going to write in div. We're going to create a new div, and we're going to call this column. So within this new row, we've created this larger container, and then inside there, we're going to create two columns that are going to contain the tempo heading or the label, and then a text box, and then a second column that it's going to have the label, and then a toggle box. This first one, which is going to be within this column, is going to be a label object. And I'm going to type in label -4 equals, and this is going to be called tempo -text. Close those. And then within this label and closing label tags, I'm going to type in tempo. Hit enter. And then I'm going to create an input object. So open angle brackets input, and I'm going to type in type equals text space ID is going to be equal to tempo -text, and then this is going to be the constraints of our tempo for our sequencer. And this can be, for me, I'm going to say that the min value for for this text box is going to be 60. No, let's say 40. I don't want the tempo to be any slower than that. And then the maximum is going to be something like, I don't know, 140. So not terribly too fast. And then the default value, I'm going to have it start out by 120. And the increment is going to, which we will use the word step, is going to be by 1. We don't want the values to be smaller than 1 value. You could even have it be 2 if you wanted to be. Great. And so I hit save, and you can see that the tempo is appearing, the label, and then the value right there. Great. And so that's one column. And again, the styling doesn't matter too much right now. We're going to create a second column right underneath it, because it doesn't really the HTML doesn't know how to interpret any of what these meanings of columns yet, because we haven't written the new style that is coordinated through these IDs and tags and classes. So we're going to create a new div. So div.column. And within that column is going to be pretty similar. We're going to be working to create a new label. So it's going to be a label for equals in quotes, and we're going to say this is going to be tempo toggle, tempo-toggle, end quotes, angle brackets, and we're going to add the word start. Close label right there. Great. And then we're going to add a new input element, and the type is going to be, last time we had a text type, this time it's going to be a checkbox, and the ID is going to be the same as the label for, so tempo toggle. I just hit save, and you can see that those elements appear over here now. So we're going to build the rest of this, and we can think about what's going to happen here. I've sort of mentally thought about how I would organize things, and I would think about this area that contains the word melody, and this multi-slider section, similar to what we see in Max. This sort of area is going to be translated into something like this. And then I'll have a volume slider right here for that specific part of the sequencer. And then a number box that represents what that slider value is. And then we're going to duplicate that for the rhythm or the drum part of our instrument. Some parts of this is going to be duplicative with some particular naming elements. So I'm just going to reduce this, and we have just created 2 sections, and now we're going to drop down to this one that is the melody portion of it. So make sure that we are outside of this transport. One way to look at it for VS Code is that this line represents a connection between the opening of one div or a container all the way down to here. And we don't want to add this melody instrument into this container. We're going to create a brand new div. So I'm going to scroll just a little bit over here, and we're going to say div hashtag melody. It's going to create that new container for our melody. And we want to have our text here. It's going to be similar to what we had other text. In this case, it's going to be H3, so it's slightly smaller than the sequencer, and it's not going to have any more class or ID name, but we're going to write in melody. Hit save, you can see melody appears right here. Again, styling doesn't matter at the moment. From here, we're going to create a new div, and we're going to say div with an ID, so hashtag melody sliders, melody dash sliders. And then we're going to give it a class of rotate. What is going to happen is we're actually going to create many of these sliders that we had before, these horizontal ones, and then we're going to actually rotate that slider bank so that it looks vertical. Vertical sliders are kind of weird in HTML world because the user experience is kind of different, or they're used to rendering horizontal sliders. But in the music tech world, we love vertical sliders because they match the physical world of things like mixers. It's just something that the HTML world doesn't have commonly. They have them, but not as much as horizontal sliders. And so we're actually going to create a bunch of horizontal sliders and then rotate them 90 degrees. So what we're going to do is we're going to create one more div, and we're going to call this div and give it a class name of column. And then we're going to build out a whole bunch of different sliders. They're going to be very similar, and we're going to create basic one and then rename one aspect of it. So we're going to start out by creating an input, and we just go angle bracket input, and then give it some parameters. It's going to be a type of, so we've had a few different types of input so far. We had text, and we had toggle or checkbox. This new type is going to be a range. And that's basically what HTML land thinks of as sliders. So it's a range input. And we're going to give it a specific ID of melody dash slider dash 1. We're going to be able to access the values of each individual melody slider because we're going to give them unique IDs. Each of these sliders are all going to have the same other parameters, like the min, they're all going to be starting from 0.0 with a max equal to 1.0, and then have a default starting value of 0. That way, when you turn on your web page, it doesn't have some default values to it. You can if you want to. The step is going to be similar to what we did for our max patch, and we're going to have an increment of 0.01. And then every slider is going to have a specific class. And for the melody, it's going to be class equals SEQ, short for sequencer slider. That's going to help us be able to describe the styling of each slider. So there is a bit of uniqueness to each one, but a lot of it is going to be the same. So the commonalities for all of them is going to be the type, min, max, value, step, and class. And the unique thing for all the other ones is going to be these ID. And we're going to make 8 of these, similar to what we have over here in our max patch. So I'm just going to copy this, and we can paste these 8 times. And make sure that starting from the top, we have melody slider 1, melody slider 2, melody slider 3, all the way down to 8. So I'll give you a moment to do that. I need one more, make sure that I'm outside of this input bracket, paste, and then rename that to be 8. I'm going to hit save, and you'll notice that I now have 8 sliders. They don't look the same yet. Again, we're going to style them, and they will end up looking very similar to this layout. So this is the melody area, and based on our mockup, let's look back at our mockup. We have this new additional slider, which is more or less a regular horizontal slider that we're used to, and we're going to put this at the end. We know that this containing div is the column div. Remember that line that comes down here, and the next containing div is, let's see, is the melody one. And so after this melody sliders div, let me click here, then we want to have a new one here. And so we're going to add a new div after that. And we're going to say div with an ID of, so hashtag melody dash volume dash container. And then we're going to add a class, and this is going to be a row. And within that, we're going to have 2 new elements. We're going to have a new input element. And again, this input is going to be a type of range, because that's what HTML land thinks of as sliders. And then we're going to give it an ID. Oh, I need to have an opening bracket, angle bracket. Input here. So I just added an input angle bracket in front of input. And so this ID is going to be melody volume, melody dash volume. And it's going to have a class of volume slider. Last couple things is the min is going to be 0 and the max is going to be 1. We can add floating points to them. And remember what how do we assign default? We use value, and we're going to say that that value starts out at 0. Last thing that we want to do is, different than these multi-sliders right here, we do want to indicate what the value might be in terms of volume. It may not matter so much on mobile, but we want to print out that value that we have here. So we'll have label, and labels like to be matched up with some sort of input element. And so in this for, we're going to match up the ID that we had here for our input element. So it's a label for that specific element, and we're going to give it a class of volume dash text. Whenever we have more than one element with similar styling that we want to group, oftentimes that's where we use classes. And I'm just going to give it just a value right here so that we can see what it might look like here. I just hit save, and you can see that we have this 8 sliders, and this last slider is the one that we had for our melody volume slider. Great. So we have all of the elements that we needed for here. Now we're going to add the elements for rhythm, and it's going to be super similar. What we could do is we could go to melody and copy everything. So we can just click from here I'm going to hold down Shift and click up to the top and containing the div for the melody all the way up here. So this is everything that we just created in this box over here. And we're just going to duplicate that. So I just hit paste and hit save, and you can see that over here on the page over here, we have everything duplicated. What we need to do is we need to go back to the area that we just pasted, this second version right here, and we want to rename IDs because, again, we said IDs should be unique, classes should be grouping names. So for me, my line 126, where we have the second instance of melody, we're going to go back here and we're going to rename this to be rhythm. And where it says melody, we're going to type in rhythm. Where it says melody sliders, you could probably guess we're going to change melody to lowercase rhythm. Where it says rhythm dash slider or melody dash slider 1, we're going to type in rhythm. What you could do is you could select one of these words, and I think if you hit Command D on VS Code on a Mac, you'll notice I selected this thing. I can hit Command D and it'll start to highlight all the other instances of melody on down to starting from where I first clicked. And if it selects all 8 of those, then I can actually edit them all together. I just hit delete and deleted all of those, and you can see the flashing versions of it. And I can then type in rhythm and it replaces all of those for me. If that's too scary, that's okay. I'm going to hit undo so that I can see all these melodies. And you can just go back and type in and make sure that you, in the end, when we're finished, we have 8 sliders in the second section that say rhythm slider dash 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I just reviewed those and those seem correct. I'm going to move down here. So for me, my line 204, I'm going to rename this melody volume to be rhythm also. And then this last ID for this slider right here currently is named melody volume. It should be rhythm volume. One very last one is the label or the value that's going to be printed here, and we'll call this that. I just hit save. I sort of do it instinctually oftentimes when I do a bunch of edits, and you can see that those changes appear here on our web page. And so we created that last container right here with those elements. Basically, it was a duplication of this first one, so it didn't really take too long. And hopefully I didn't leave out any edits that we needed to after we do that duplication, but I think that's pretty good. And we're going to go back now to our VS Code, open up our file editor, and we are going to take this style and we're just going to make a copy just like we did before. I don't want to make these changes. I'm going to hit copy and hit paste. We have style here, and I'm just going to rename this to be something like seq-style. And it should be just a duplicate of our style page. And I'm going to go to the new.html, and I'm going to slide to the very top or the head section of our page. And you'll notice that at line 11, it has this link and rel style sheet with an href. This href is a file location address for the style, and we are going to be using seq-style. So what we're going to do is come over to the style slash, and right after that slash here, we're going to type in seq-style and hit save. And so this new HTML page is going to be looking for the file that we just created and not the old one that we had. I'm going to close this file editor, and I'm going to select seq-style.css, And this is the area that we are going to be editing to start changing the style so that it starts to match what our mockup looks like. Because right now we have the elements, but we don't have the styling put in place. Okay. One thing that I like to do when I first start making some web pages is seeing how things line up in terms of structure, is to do this visual trick in terms of being able to visualize the containers of my page. And I'm going to go right below this body because before we move on is this type of code that allows us to see some boxes and how they're organized. And hopefully it matches up with these purple lines that we have here. So I'm going to do asterisk, which means every single element within my web page is going to take on this rule or the styles. So I'm going to do open squiggly bracket. So I'm going to type in box dash sizing colon content box content dash box. And you'll notice right here that this area has some autocomplete suggestions. Every browser in the world doesn't necessarily behave the same way. And so as someone that makes web pages, you sort of have to acknowledge that the way that we tell a web page to render might have different keywords to them. And you'll notice that this suggestion is Moz dash box sizing. It's really similar to the rule that we just wrote. And some browsers like Firefox or I think Brave follow different types of rules. And so we need to use some rules sometimes that have similar-ish names with the same type of parameters. And Safari uses a WebKit sort of library to render its web pages. And so basically we're covering our bases in terms of styles or rules when we start to have these dash Moz or dash WebKit rules. We're going to keep those, and we're going to add in border dash width colon 1 px, which is 1 pixel, and then we're going to do border style colon solid, and the last one is border color, and it's going to be black. Once we hit save, you'll notice that before we had no boxes, but now we have a whole bunch of these boxes, and this helps me. I like to do this. Maybe after you do this video, you're gonna hate this, but this helps me sort of visualize where the space is, where the containers, and where they lie. In the end, I will delete this or hide this element and hit save, and those will all go away. But in terms of starting to build and create some styles, I like to have this here just so I can sort of see how things are organized. Great. We're going to drop down to where it ends. For me, it's line 67, and I'm going to just write in some commented out code. So I'm going to slash asterisk space asterisk slash, and that's going to allow me to have this visual space to let me know that this is new CSS code and not the old Rainbow code. In the end, we might delete all this other stuff, but we're just going to keep it there for the moment. Great. So we're going to write out some styles, and we're going to start mainly from the top on down. And I'm going to split this page. I'm going to drag this new HTML to the side so I can sort of reference where we started from. One of the things that we started with was main container and rounded. And so let's go ahead and write our rounded style. Whenever we have a class and we want to write a style or a rule to it, classes start out with a dot and IDs start out with a hashtag. So for when we write a rule for a rounded class, we're going to do dot and we'll write rounded. And then we'll have squiggly brackets to contain whatever rule we're going to be adding. And in this case, we're going to create a border dash radius, which is going to be 5 pixels. We'll hit save. We shouldn't see anything wild about that at the moment. Next thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a style or rules for our main content. And again, we're going to start talking about using a display convention called Flexbox. And if you're not familiar with Flexbox, please go to the description of this video, and I have a link, a couple of links that I think are excellent to describe the rules of using Flexbox, which is really handy in terms of spacing or placing elements and how they might lay out. Different types of conventions like grid, CSS have other ways of thinking about how you might stack things. And ultimately, it's how do different elements, do they overlap or do they displace one another? How can you easily align elements? Those sorts of things. How much space do you have between them? Are they evenly spaced? Etc., etc. So please go and check out those links if you're not familiar with Flexbox. So we're going to start out with main content, and main content is an ID. So we go hashtag main-content, open squiggly brackets, and we're going to type in display : flex. From there, we're going to type in flex direction. You might see me using the autocomplete. Flex direction column, and align items, center with a width of 60%, margin auto, border width, so border, again similar to what we had before, border width 1 pixel, border color black, border style solid, and then I'm going to add a margin to the very top of 10 pixels. So after we add this area, we should see this, I haven't hit save yet, but this area should be truncated left to right and then have a little bit of a gap at the top. Hitting save now. So rainbow instrument, this main container is going to have those elements in there. Oh, so I made a little mistake. You can see, remember when you described main container, this is one of the reasons we have these borders. I'm going to pop my face in here because I'm sort of surprised myself. One of the reasons that we have, I added that box sizing element is to help me see what things are contained or not. And so I did have an error in the initial portion of this when we're making that web page. And this outside box with the rounded corners is supposed to contain all of the stuff that we added before. And so I misplaced the closing of this particular div around line 18. And so what I need to do is take this closing div and bring it, I'm going to hit Command X to cut it, and I'm going to delete that line and bring it all the way down to the last div that we have here and paste that. I'm going to hit save, and you can see that this area now has all those elements. There's a little bit of margin there. I think that's okay. That's going to be something else when we're finished. So now that main content has all of the text, the transport, the melody, and the rhythm elements in it. So it was really handy to have this asterisk with the box sizing and border stuff to help me see where I had an error in the HTML side of things. Cool, I'm going to make myself disappear now. Going back to where we were, we just styled out this main content to style rules, and we're going to keep going now. So going back to the CSS page, we are going to, let me bring up my preview. I'm going to start to go to main title and title container. I'm going to go to main title, so squiggly brackets, and we're going to type in margin : 10 pixels. Then we're going to say text align to be center. So that adjusted this rainbow text right here. You can see that sequencer didn't get adjusted. It's in this main content, but we just edited the content for the main title. And we want, separate from the sizing of the text, we want this subtitle to also obey these two rules. We wanted to have margin of 10 and align text. If we have two separate IDs that want to have the same two rules, we can add that the name of that ID as well to this. I'm going to add this ID, the second ID, the subtitle ID, to go along with the other rules that we presented for the main title ID. And all we have to do is copy that ID and have a comma and then paste that in there with the hashtag at the start of it. And you can see that the subtitle now is centered vertically. Great. So now that we have this title figured out, we are now going to look at this next container right here, which I've called the transport. And we're going to define the container space and then these two boxes. And this first container is just going to describe how we're going to put or arrange these other ones. And we want to think about these as columns, in that this container is going to have one item and then vertically have the next item below it. And this is slightly different than what we might think if we want to have labels that go horizontally. You can maybe arrange it so that you have a container that goes here that has the labels, and then this area that has the UI elements. I mainly wanted to go up and down vertically so that I can vertically align the labels with the UI. It would have been a little bit trickier to make sure that the text sat directly above the UI elements. So that's why I arranged everything vertically. So we are now going to look at the HTML page and see that we have this next area right here where we're looking at the transport. And we're first going to define a rule set that has the ID transport. So hashtag transport, open this up, and we are going to have it display flex and give it a width of 100%. Then we'll tell it the flex direction to be row. So that defines the larger container and not the smaller container at the moment. Justify content to be center, and and align items center. Again, if these terms are new to you, please refer to the reference link that I have in the description. You'll notice that when I hit save, it adjusted some of the content here because it is thinking everything should be aligned in a row, and we haven't defined the inner container to tell that these two elements, two smaller containers, are going to be vertically aligned, and that's the next thing that we're going to do. We have an outside container called column, and in there we're going to have a label for tempo text and then input of tempo. And so what we're going to do is we need to define what a column is going to be, and I don't think that we've done that yet. Let's see. No, we haven't. So let's go here, and actually we should probably come up here because this is going to be a greater definition that we're going to use. So let's see, where are my notes? Column. We're going to go column like this, and we're going to say that it's going to be a display flex, and then we're going to say that the flex direction is going to be column. Previously we said that this container is going to be a row, and that put everything from left to right or right to left, whatever way. By default it goes left to right. But then we want to say that this inner container here that starts with column, which contains the tempo text and the tempo box here, we want to say that that's going to be aligned vertically or in a column. So if I hit save now, we need to add a few more features. So we're going to say beyond flex direction, we're going to say justify content to be flex start, and then align items center, margin. We're going to define some margins, 10 pixels, and minimum height to be 50 pixels. We're saying that this vertical container should have a minimum of 50 pixels. The reason I put that in there is because it jumbled or bunched these two elements together, and it made the other two elements look misaligned. Alright, so we just defined the column, and you'll notice that these two items now are snapping up and down against the row that we created. Just to compare what we had over here, we had that greater row and then two column containers here. So let's go ahead and now define the rules for this container and this smaller container. And you can see that the numbers here are not aligned vertically, so we need to make sure that our column content is defined right here. So let's look at our column that we have for our tempo text. It is going up and down, but the text which is inside this element right here is the reason that it's not aligned. So let's go to define the tempo text, as well as sorry, the tempo text is this element here, and this is the label right here. So we're going to go down to here and define tempo dash text, and those rules are going to look like this. We're going to say width equals 40 pixels. I'm going to slide up a little bit so we can see 40 pixels. Text align, and these two definitions are going to say that we're going to reduce the width of this box to be 40 pixels wide, and then we're going to say that the text should sit in the middle of whatever the width is going to be. Beyond that, let's hit save and just look at that. You can see that now it's shrunk down. We zoom in just a little bit here. Oh, I'm going to close this. You can see that this text box has its own native containing bordered box here, and we can define that. In our sketch that we had, I had sort of a rounded corners, and we can define those here. So we're going to say border width is going to be 1, so that we can see that. It's already set there by default, we just redefine it there. Border color is black. Border style is solid. And border radius, that's what gives us the roundedness to it. It's going to be 5 pixels. Almost everything that we have is going to be 5 pixels if we have a rounded corner. You can see there, great. We have this rounded corner container for our numbers. Now we can go to the next element. We already defined the column for this. We have this column style that we had a little bit higher previously right here. This is a class. That's why we have that dot column. And within there we have this tempo toggle, which is this box right here. We don't have anything styled for it at the moment. We're going to come back to that element actually. We're going to move forward now and address this middle area, which is going to be the melody. And that includes the label or the text, and then these multi-sliders, which currently look all horizontal right now, and we're going to rotate them and then stylize them so that they don't have these knobs, and then give it a background color as well as a forefront color. And we're going to come down here and we're going to add some new text. First, we're going to define an all-encompassing input, because we want to reduce the padding for most of these. I don't think that this is going to make much difference at the moment. I think maybe I was experimenting with this earlier, but I want to make sure that there is no extra padding with any of our input elements, and that includes sliders, text boxes, and anything that's interactable is an input type of element. So we're setting those padding to be 0 for inline and block. Great. We're going to ignore this melody text styling for the moment, and we're going to go jump into what we've been looking at here and address these sliders first. And this is going to be a pretty long style or rule. And let's first look at it first. One thing that we've been saying is that we're going to rotate them in a little bit, but first we're going to add some style and alter their appearance. And there's going to be a lot of text that we need to type out. So I'm going to make a little bit of space so that it's going to be easy for you all to see and type out yourself. So I'm going to increase the size of this typeface. I'm going to define it as input. And this, now we're going to talk about type. In this case, it's going to be range. We used text earlier for a different type of element. And we want to make sure that if we left it right here and then create a style, it would be for all sliders in this web experience. But we know that we have some sliders that we don't want to alter their appearance much. And so we are going to say that first, find all the sliders and then look for a certain class that they belong to. And we said when we first created the HTML page that all the sliders that we're going to be dealing with in this section is going to have a class called SEQ for sequencer dash slider, so seek slider. And so we're going to constrain our style rules to anything with seek slider. So we're adding a dot seek slider there. And then so everything that we every style or rule that we add here is going to only address these ones right here, because everything that has this class of seek slider is going to be changed. Great. We're going to start out by making sure that we cover some bases. We're going to say WebKit dash appearance is going to be none. And then we're going to say appearance is going to be none. We are sort of addressing different types of browsers that might be looking at this code, and one of them could be Safari, and then could be a general browser. And we're saying that we're going to override the default style that they have. So we're going to wipe it all blank first, and then we are going to change that style. Most of the time, we eventually are going to be using fingers to interact with this, but we want to address what it might look like if we have a mouse that slides over these sliders. We're going to say the width of each slider is going to be 200 pixels, and the height is going to be 40 pixels. The z-index is something that we're going to set pretty high, 200, because we want to make sure that in case we are rendering things and we might be accidentally overlapping things, we're going to set the z-index to be really close to us so they render on top of other elements. From there, we are going to define the border of each slider. I just hit save, and you can see that some of the existing defaults styles disappeared. We're going to continue to add more rules, and this will start to look like what we have over here. I'm going to say overflow is going to be hidden. In order to achieve this coloring of the slider to show how far we've gone, we're going to add something called an offset or a box shadow. We're going to be adding a box shadow, and we want to hide when it overlaps different sliders or when it flows over the existing slider. Border radius is going to be 0 in this case. We want to be explicit that we don't want any rounding for our sliders. Line height is going to be normal and point. This was something I think that doesn't really make too much of a difference. We could probably cancel that out. I was experimenting with adding some text to display what the values were, but I think in this case it's not going to matter too much for us. From there, we're going to add margin 0. And we're just going to cover some more bases where, depending on the browser that we have, we're going to repeat some of these rules with the border radius. So we're going to say WebKit dash border radius is going to be 0 pixels, and then dash Moz for Mozilla border radius is also going to be 0 pixels. We had this or the other one right here. We could probably just move these so they're grouped together and makes sense, like this. Okay, great. Continuing on, we are going to now add the background color for these elements. I know that we don't see too much change at the moment. We've eliminated some existing styles. Some things are going to be more apparent every time that we save it. These next couple steps is going to be a few of copy and paste, but you'll see the pattern as it emerges. So we're saying that for each slider now, we're going to add individual style or color to the background of each slider, depending on the index of them. So we can think about this as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We're going to say that the first one has a certain color, the second one has a certain color, and some of it is kind of repetitive, but you'll see what I mean in a moment. And so we're going to say every slider, and then start to constrain the slider by the nth of its type. So in this case, we're saying if you happen to be the first of the sliders that exist, then we want to give you a specific rule or style. And we're going to first address it using WebKit, which again is the Safari version of web browsers. So we're going to say WebKit slider thumb. So we're going to restyle these circles. And what we're going to say is, for all the thumbs, we are going to change the background color to be a certain color. At the moment, we could just pick aqua or some sort of existing default color. And then we're going to go to box shadow, and we're going to put in some specific numbers. Let's say that this is going to be 800 pixels, 0, 0, 800 pixels, and then aqua. You'll see what I mean in a moment, and then we're going to do some specific things. So right now this style is not changing much because there's actually some more changes we have to do. One other thing that we need to do is, in order to set up this pattern of colors, we are actually going to create a bank of variables that are going to be the colors of these sliders. So we're going to pause for a moment from where we are here, and we're going to slide up to the very top of this style sheet. And we are going to create that bank of variables for our sliders. And so we're going to say root, and this is going to be basically the area that we can adjust our colors from. So we're going to say :root, open and close squiggly brackets. From there, we're going to use dash dash and use some variable names, or create some variable names. And I'm just going to pause it right here. These are the colors that I selected for my sliders, and you can copy them into your style guide. And so basically, the 8 possible, I might have made 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, I accidentally made too many. We could probably get rid of teal and save it like that. We have 8 different colors, and these ones in that order will be the colors that we see from the sliders: blue, indigo, purple, pink, red, orange, yellow, green. You can change, it doesn't matter what the order they are. You'll have the opportunity to rearrange them when you want when we come back down. So if we slide back down here now, we're going to eliminate where it says aqua. And in order to use those variables, depending on their name, we need to first type out var, and then within the parentheses, we can define the color that we want. And for both spots here, we're going to eliminate that, and we're going to use var open and close parentheses dash dash that color. So make sure that every time that we do this, we're about to repeat this. Both the background color and the box shadow have the same variable name, color name. So we're going to do this a couple times. We're going to copy this and paste it again till we get 8 total. Till we get 8 total. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And we're going to adjust these by making sure that we have that 1. We'll go down to the second one. We'll say 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then for each of these, then we can select a different color for the different bars or sliders that we are going to be coloring. So the second one, I don't want to be blue. I can then now go to here. I can double click on this, delete, and then hit green. Double click on this, delete, select indigo. And you can, of course, change the order of these colors if you want. I'm just going to keep it simple for the video. I'm hitting delete for that each time I select this. I'm double clicking and then hitting the delete button. Nom to red. Yellow. Okay. I'm going to hit save now. Again, we don't see too much because there's actually one more set of rules that we need to adjust for our thumb and our trackers. And you'll see those in a moment. One last thing that we need to do for this set of rules is most of these changes that we see here, you'll notice that we have this dash WebKit slider thumb. And we said that most browsers have different rendering engines underneath them, essentially. And the most common ones are Chrome, Safari, or Firefox, Mozilla. And we need to address these overrides because we set the appearance to be none. This basically says that we're not going to use the default stuff. And now we have to, and we said we have some special styles. The ones that we just wrote out are for Safari browsers. And we actually need to write one more set for the Mozilla browsers. And it looks really similar to what we just did with just some exceptions in that we just need to have the same callouts for the Mozilla ones. And so what we could do is paste what we had that last time and rename it the last one that we had here from Mozilla. I'm sorry, from WebKit to Moz. So my suggestion is start where we were. We had to finish those 8. And then we're going to come over here and select all the way up to that first one where it says that 1 in parentheses. Copy. We're going to select 2 parts of this and change it to Moz dash range thumb. So I'm just going to highlight this area right here, and for each one, Moz range thumb. I could just copy here like this and just paste it. I'll give you a second to follow along to do as I am. Again, the end goal is to make it look like dash Moz dash range dash thumb. Everything else should be the same. Great. Now that we have the styles for both Safari and Mozilla browsers, Chrome should be able to handle all of this just fine. We're going to add a new set of rules, and this is going to be changing the track. We're going to go input, inside brackets we're going to address again the range style of inputs. Again, we're going to be looking at the sequence slider. In this case, we're going to look specifically again at the WebKit slider thumb, or sorry, we're going to look specifically at WebKit slider dash runnable track. And that's going to be the, let me bring this up, the color of underneath here. So there's actually two parts when we look at sliders, and it's more apparent when we look at these traditional sliders. There's that thumb or the knob area, and then there's the runnable track that could be a different color that lets you know how far you've come along. And now we're going to be adjusting the runnable track of these. We're basically turning off the default with this style. And so we're going to go height to be 100, width to be 100, background to be hash 123, hash 000, I'm sorry, hash 000, border radius to be 0 pixels, and then margin to be 0 pixels. I just hit save, and you'll notice that a lot of this had just turned black. That's okay. We're making progress. Things are changing closer to what we expect. We're going to repeat this whole thing, copy this, paste, and we're going to change this WebKit slider runnable track portion to be dash Mose range track. So in the end, it's going to be dash Mose dash range dash track. Okay. We're nearly there. We're going to add another one that's going to be input dat, and inside brackets type range seek slider we're going to be changing the WebKit, so dash WebKit dash slider dash thumb, and we're going to set the default, reset the default here. It's going to be WebKit dash appearance, and we're going to set it to none, and we're going to set the width to be 100, height, can't type, height to be 100%. We are going to do one last version of this, and we're going to copy, paste, and we're going to change this WebKit slider to Mose range thumb, and change this WebKit appearance to be just appearance none. Now that I hit save, you'll notice that these values are all rainbow colored now. And so if we look at the colors now, they are the colors that we had picked, but everything is still horizontal. And I think that we're almost there. Let's add one more rule. Oh, I'm sorry, and it's going to be dot rotate. And we're going to say display block. This is the next conventional way of displaying things. We had Flexbox before. Display block is the default way of displaying things. I'm going to say WebKit transform. We're going to be addressing the transform of this container right here, and we're going to say that we're going to rotate it. So we're going to say transform rotate, that's the command, negative 90 degrees, so deg. We're going to address it for Mozilla, so we're going to say dash mos transform colon same command, rotate negative 90 deg. We're going to do a couple more. O transform rotate 90 degrees dash ms dash transform same command, rotate 90 degrees. Margin dash top would. This is a little bit of house cleaning right here. I'm just adjusting the space between this container and the next element because before, this is a little bit of housekeeping right here in terms of adjusting the rotation. We've lost some height because the browser first renders it so that there is no gap before we rotate, and now that we rotated it, because it's more wide than it is tall, we need to eliminate this space. And so this margin top, if we hit save now, it's going to bring it up a little bit higher. We could in fact increase this value so it's something like negative 50. Then we have a little bit of the space eliminated. We're going to do the same thing for the bottom because there's a little bit of space right here. I'm going to say margin bottom negative 50. So that brings it up a little bit closer there. You'll notice that these bottom sliders got adjusted too because they also have that same class of slider-seek. Let me bring this over here. We have the melody sliders, and then we have the rhythm sliders. Here's the rhythm container here, and even though they belong to the rhythm block, their class is seek slider, so they take on that same style and they have the same iteration rules as well. Now that we've done the rotations, I'm looking back at this code and I made one slight error. We need to go back to over here to our thumb, and I had some of these lines that said 100% in terms of width and height. We need to make two changes, and that's why everything looks kind of awkward. We said that these two styles address the track, right? And so we can consider the track to be a portion of our slider that when we move it left to right, let me look at the preview here. This is the track here, and we want to style that with a width and a height. And then this knob or this thumb has its own style too. And I made the mistake of saying that the width of the thumb for both the WebKit and the Mozilla browser had to be 100 width. And we wanted to match the colors of the track. And so I accidentally said that this had to be 100%. Going back here, if we change this to pixel for here, and then 10% for the Mozilla, and then hit save, go back here, we can see that these tracks will react to us clicking and dragging. What it should look like is that you can snap to any portion of each track, and the knob or that thumb is going to be the same color of the track. We can do this for both now, and so that's my mistake that I had here. So we changed the width of the thumb. Instead of being 100%, it should be just 10 pixels for both the Mozilla and the Firefox version. So we're ready to move on. We've just added the correction of adjusting the width of the sliders, and it's kind of confusing because saying width is before we rotated it. So if we comment out this rotate code here and then hit save, you can see that this is actually the width of the knob that we were controlling before. We want to undo that and bring it over like this. And we are now going to finish the stylings for the rest of the page. We're now going to go down to where we have the rotate, and we're going to add a couple more style rules. We're going to say H3, which we have for this melody and rhythm. We're going to make it so that the margin is 0. Oops. Open that like this, then apply the rule, margin 0. In this case, we're going to say that the font dash style is going to be italic, because going back at our original mock-up, we had it in italicized. Italic. Font family, font dash family. I'm going to make it Arial, Helvetica, Sans Serif. So these are just fallbacks. And font weight to be 100. I'm going to hit save and take a look at this thing, the way that melody is styled when I hit save. Okay, that's pretty close. So that text looks pretty good right here. Let's keep moving forward. We're going to adjust the look and the feel of this slider right here. Keep in mind that we were making adjustments to the other range sliders, and we gave them a class name of Seek slider. And both of these, for the melody and the rhythm, have a different class name of volume slider. And so we're going to change the look of those now. So we're going to come down here and we're going to say input square brackets. Type is equal to range, and we're looking specifically at the volume slider class, volume dash slider, and we're going to say that their width is going to be 80%. I want to take up 80% of this containing box. And I want to set once I hit save, you notice that that slider slid more, filled up this area a little bit more. We're going to adjust now the label, or this text right here. So we're going to go, and we know that this label belongs to a class called volume-text. So we're going to come over here and we're going to say volume dash text has these certain rules. Width is going to be 40 pixels. Text align is going to be centered. The border, it currently has a border. We're going to make sure that it's border width of 1. Border color of black. Border style, we just want to be explicit of these rules. It's going to be solid. And then we want to have a border radius of 5 pixels. You'll notice that once we hit save, that we have those rules right there. This is getting close to what we want. We're going to do a few more tweaks. We want to define the sizing of this slider area, and we gave those containers a specific name. We had melody volume container, and we also had rhythm volume container. And we can address those styles like we did before by going hashtag melody volume container, comma, and then rhythm volume container, and set it to something like this. I decided I want to do width 80%. And you can see that this slid over to be 80% of the container here for this melody, which is essentially what I wanted. But we're missing a couple things. Oh, so adding this 80% made this volume container and this rhythm volume container to be 80% of the width of these greater containers, but you'll notice that both the rhythm and the melody are all shifted to the left. We're missing two styles that we need to give, and remember that the rhythm had a container and melody also had a container, both of ID melody and container, melody and rhythm. So what we're going to do is we're going to create hashtag melody, comma, hashtag rhythm, and then we're going to have these styles below. We're going to say it's going to be display flex, width is going to be 100%, justify items, flex start, flex direction is going to be column, align items center. After hitting save, you'll notice that this melody is here right in the middle. The slider here is going to be in the middle. This is also going to be in the middle. And then if we just pull it out to be maybe the typical width of a browser, then it's very close to what we were shooting for our preview. You might have noticed that these last two sliders that we had, if we grasp them and we move them around, they're jumping between the bounds here. And there was one aspect that I forgot to add when we're looking at the volume slider. So looking at the line 203, this is the bottom one right here. It behaves this way in that if I try to touch it, then it just jumps back and forth like this. We had the min max value. We need to define the step, which is the increment between each possible part to leave the thumb. And with the other sliders that we had for our sequencer, we had this value of 0.01. We're going to do the same thing here. So we're going to add step 0.01, and we just changed it for this bottom slider. I hit save. We can come over here and we can slide this around, and we don't have it just jumping between the upper and lower bounds. We're going to go back to about, for me, it's going to be line 120-ish. And this is the melody volume slider here. We can go over here and we're going to say step equals 0.01. Hit save. We should be able to come over here and then adjust that slider. Cool. Now we want to do a couple more house cleaning things and remove these bounding boxes that we had here because they've served their purposes. They helped us see where the areas of these containing boxes are, and we'll do that first, and then we're going to clean up one more thing that I just saw. So opening this up, we're nearly done. We're going to go and find the very top of this, and we're just going to comment out that asterisk area right here. So we can just do this whole thing because that's the thing that we don't need at all. We can hit Command/ and it'll comment at that area. We can see that these portions now are no longer being rendered. Okay, so it seems like everything looks pretty good now. One last thing that we want to look at is this text is a little bit squished in this container, and I think I realized I forgot to give you one style. You'll notice that what I'm checking here is built into all browsers is a way to inspect the code that it tries to render, and I can right click on an element and go to inspect element, and it brings up a new window that shows me a lot of information. And almost all browsers that you use has this sort of element. You can right click and say show or inspect element. And it shows me that on this left side is the HTML code. And I can look at any element here. Right now I have this part highlighted. It tells me the code that exists for this particular line, and it should match up with the element that I have here for the melody volume, which is super handy because then I can see, like, is it really executing the code that I gave it, or is something superseding it? And the thing I realized is that I have some code for melody, and I have this melody volume container. If I hover over it, you can see that in this browser portion, it has the bounding boxes, which contain the range slider, and then this volume box. And you can see that this box is not that big, and in proportion left to right, this part sticks out, and that lets me know that this box is sort of getting truncated over on this side. And I realize that there's a class that I haven't defined here. You can see that I have this class of row, and we defined column earlier. We just didn't give the specifics of what a row would be. And so we're going to go back to our style, and let's find where we had column written. It is right over here, and this is a big goof on my part. We should have defined what row is. So we're going to say dot row. And so I'm at line 93, open and close squiggly brackets. We're going to say that this is going to be display flex, flex direction is going to be row in this case. This is a parameter that you can have for Flexbox. And a couple other things is we're going to define a flex grow parameter, and we're going to set that to be 0. So that means if the browser gets resized, do the proportions change in some sort of way. We're going to say align items, and this is where it's going to help adjust the contents if we have more than one item in this row. So we're going to say that they're going to be aligned in the center line along the dominant axis, which is going to be horizontal. And then we're going to say that we're going to justify the content to be in the center. Last thing that we're going to do is define a margin, and that's going to be 10 pixels. So before I hit save, I'm not going to hit save yet. I'm just going to move this and close this inspection box. Bring it over to where we were looking before, hit save, and we can see that these elements now should be a lot more balanced. Before we had these pulled out, and now that text box used to be a little bit over here. We can see that it's a little bit more balanced now. This range slider should be moving left and right like we had before. These vertical bars should be moving up and down, and we've done it pretty much in terms of having our style defined. We could play with these areas right here. We have this box, and it feels kind of off. One thing that I didn't script out for this video, but we can do now, is we can go over here and we can say that we want this is an input element, and we want it to be of type. We know that it's going to be a type of checkbox, and we can say that we want it to be bigger. Right now it's probably, if we inspect it, right click on this, and then we can look at the style that it is trying to execute. It's 12 by 12, and so that maybe if it feels small, then we can adjust the size of it. And so if we change to 2020 and then we hit save, it makes it look a little bit bigger, but then this area now feels a little bit off. We could say something like 15, and it's a little bit bigger here. There's a little bit of gap between these two. And maybe one thing that we could do if we wanted to change things is make it so that this text box right here, I'm going to inspect it again. This is the tempo text, and the style that's getting executed right now is saying, let's look at it. Is there a upper margin or padding? What we could say is we could say margin dash top, and say that this is going to be 5 pixels. that brings it into a little bit more proportion, maybe 3 pixels like that. And so if we're happy with that, then we can copy this line if we wanted to. We'll just memorize that it's going to be the tempo text. Come back over here to hashtag tempo text and insert this line here. We can say margin dash top and to be 3 pixels. Hit save. It's going to re-render itself with the changes that we had, and that's closer to maybe what we want. From here, let's say that we're happy with this area like this, and one other thing that we could say is that we don't want this container box to be within the bounds of these sliders. And so one thing that we could do is widen the main content. Right now it's set to 60, and that basically just defines this area right here, and we could say that this is always going to be something like 90%. I'm going to hit save there, and whoops, and we're going to say that this is the end of the styling phase of it, and we are going to go make some. The next video that we're going to do is going to add logic to it so that when we move these sliders around, we're going to send the values from all the sliders to our parameter so that it's linking up with this track 1 information. And we're going to talk about where the hooks are to get into our rainbow export to send these values like we would for our max patch. We have to remember that it's going to be a name like track_1, and through the JavaScript know that when we make a change on one of these sliders, it's going to send all the values for every single slider of the melody through this name of track 1 into the rainbow export. So thanks for following along with this video. We have a lot of work to do for this last one to get every bit of the logic to interact with the changes that we have from our user interface so that we can actually control our instrument, and that's going to be in the next video. Thanks y'all. See you later.